think that's where we're ultimately going with this. And I think tying a lot of personal motivation and goals to ultimately getting more sats, stacking more sats, and sharing with others, and creating circular economy in healthcare, which is how can I, as Bitcoin continues to appreciate in purchasing power year over year, there are certain things in our life that we know we're going to have to spend on. And I think health and healthcare expense is certainly one of those. So Bitcoin offers that alternative payment rail that's always available for you in this peer-to-peer model. I think that's super important. And another is saving in Bitcoin and having that treasury perspective, Bitcoin from a treasury perspective, continue to grow. I think there is a price that everybody's going to have on selling their Bitcoin. People that bought 10, 15 years ago have had a price, and they might be selling now around 100K. And then other people buying in this decade are going to have a different price. And as Bitcoin's natural volatility in dollar terms smooths out as it continues to appreciate, you're naturally it's going to be a lot easier to using it in commerce day to day.
So, Jon Gordon, thanks for joining us today on the Medium of Exchange podcast. Really excited to dive into your background, what you're working on, the integration of how I view Bitcoin and wellness, and really how you are moving the space forward and helping healthcare providers and wellness companies get on and move towards a Bitcoin standard. So really just to start us off, would love to hear about your background, how you got into Bitcoin, and kind of what you're working on in terms of pushing forward Bitcoin adoption.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Jack and Jason, for having me on. Really excited to chat about Bitcoin, especially as a medium of exchange. So love the name of the podcast. And I think as we're moving into the
Thanks.
medium of exchange phase, we really see Bitcoin come to life. And as it was originally intended as a digital peer-to-peer cash system. And my background is in the healthcare industry. Started out consulting for hospitals and health systems, and then moved into an insurance role in Medicaid, over into product management, launching an innovative product in the hospital space, in an operating room. And really, as I was completing a double master's in health economics and policy in 2020, and the pandemic hit, and we didn't need to be in person in the office anymore, where I was working outside Chicago, definitely started to just change my worldviews and see what was happening, getting married, and just asking the question, what is money? And so I started my Bitcoin journey really in 2020 and 2021, going pretty hard and fast down the rabbit hole, reading as many books as I could get my hands on, listening to podcasts, and eventually going to the Adopting Bitcoin conference in El Salvador in 2021, November, shortly after they made Bitcoin legal tender. And after interacting with a lot of the builders in the Bitcoin space there and just experiencing Bitcoin for myself, realized this is really where my passion is, and where what I wanted to be working on. And following that conference, I noticed, no one was talking about Bitcoin in healthcare. And for me, as working in the space of an industry that is 20% of the US GDP and almost $5 trillion a year in spend, where a quarter of that's administrative and half of that is waste, there's just such a huge opportunity for Bitcoin to come into the space. And so I'm really excited to, and at that point, left the corporate job, did some traveling with my wife, did a yoga teacher training in Bali. And while we were locked up in a hotel room quarantining because of COVID in Jakarta, I was writing down all the ideas and things I had on how I thought Bitcoin could come into healthcare and integrate. And so been fortunate to be able to work on a lot of those ideas and have that come to life over the last few years. Starting out with working at Crowd Health as an alternative to health insurance, with a strong Bitcoin angle there, and then realizing, hey, where are the docs who are going to be accepting Bitcoin? There is really strong centralization forces in healthcare that have made it difficult for independent providers to continue to grow their business. And so I thought, hey, Bitcoin is the perfect solution that can be integrated into many business models in healthcare that are springing up, like direct primary care, for example, is one, or even direct specialty care, surgical centers that list their prices transparently, and you know actually what you're buying. What a concept. In healthcare, everything is hidden behind third-party payers, and only about 10% of our spend today is out of pocket or direct pay. Everything else is coming from third parties, whether it's the government or third-party insurance companies. So I started Satoshi Health Advisors a couple of years ago, really with the goal of helping healthcare businesses integrate a Bitcoin strategy, and starting all the way from understanding Bitcoin, but even first understanding what is money. Here's the fiat system. Here's how Bitcoin and Lightning works. Starting there and distilling a lot of the lessons that I've learned in my own research, presenting different options for integrating payments depending on their business models, in person, is online, e-commerce, who are their customers, saving in through by accepting Bitcoin payments is one. So obviously there's a huge philosophical element to it of adopting sound money, but it makes sense from a business perspective because Stripe is charging 3%, and with Bitcoin and Lightning, the fees now onus is on the user really, and you can lower your fees to 0 to 1% depending on who you're using to process payments, and how sovereign you want to be in running your own node, of course, is an option. Saving in Bitcoin, so treasury strategy, understanding the different options that are out there, and then ultimately marketing to Bitcoiners and being able to grow your business and reach a growing niche of consumers that are looking to earn Bitcoin rewards and or spend Bitcoin and support businesses that are on a Bitcoin standard. And so I've been able to work with a few different businesses in the space, both on the provider side, different wellness brands that are more e-commerce based, and then even other businesses that aren't as health related, such as even e-bikes, or more recently an architect who's got some exciting offerings coming out too. And so I think with Bitcoin into health, there's just so much potential. And then with Nostr coming into the equation as well, it's something I've been focused on through a company I co-founded called Nostr, which is focused on integrating using Nostr for healthcare use cases, and as well as Bitcoin as money. You see a lot of hype around blockchain for healthcare over the years. Oh, we need a token for this and that. And we're seeing is that none of that really caught hold. And I think the reason is because we only need one blockchain, and the best use cases for decentralized money that everybody's hooked up on that ledger. But we can utilize Nostr's public-private key cryptography and for identity management, and ultimately hopefully break down more of the silos that exist in healthcare, more interoperability, and ultimately sovereignty for people to take personal responsibility for their health.
John, can you loop me in on the Nostr tie-in with Nostr? Because I think of Nostr more as like a social media platform.
Yeah, so a lot of the use cases right now in Nostr are certainly social media, kind of Twitter, X clones in a way. But if you think about what Nostr is, notes and other stuff transmitted by relay, you can think about health data being some of that other stuff. And there are international standards for healthcare data called FHIR or HL7 that we can wrap in Nostr events. And now all of a sudden, if you're using this data structure, which are just JSON notes, simple data that you're packaging back and forth, we can do it in a way that's encrypted and that you have control ultimately over your own health records, which doesn't really exist in the system today. So it's still very early days. It's pretty experimental. We have an ongoing challenge with 14 million Satoshi bounty or reward pool that's out there. And we're about halfway through now, and some really interesting apps and use cases and people building open source tooling in the space. But if you think about health, it's social, right? Health is very social. You have your family members, your other loved ones, people who are along the ride for your own health journey, whatever is ailing you or you want to improve. There are certain aspects of health that you'll want to share, and we can utilize Nostr's web of trust and also social networking tools, I think, in this health context. And so it's been really interesting to work on. And then as open networks grow, just as anyone working on Bitcoin, the Bitcoin network, and accepting Bitcoin is now a part of this network, we see Nostr in a similar light from a data and communication and identity perspective. So that's kind of the Nostr tie-in now, and I think eventually there's some other work and another business that I'm excited to share coming up soon. That'll also be at this intersection of Bitcoin, health, and Nostr, and I think tying a lot of personal motivation and goals to ultimately getting more sats, stacking more sats, and sharing with others, and creating circular economy in healthcare. I think that's where we're ultimately going with this, which is how can I, as Bitcoin continues to appreciate in purchasing power year over year, there are certain things in our life that we know we're going to have to spend on. And I think health and healthcare expense is certainly one of those.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that you're helping highlight that most people don't even realize is that we don't own our data, just like Bitcoiners realize we don't own our money. And I was doing some research before this on a company that I'm sure you're pretty familiar with is Epic, that hosts like almost half of the electronic medical records in the United States alone. And that ties into this question of you mentioned waste, and just I have some experience consulting in the healthcare industry as well and understanding like the complexity. Revenue cycles, for example, are processes that are so drawn out, and it can actually take like months for these hospitals and doctors to get paid for their services. So can you just explain a little bit about how you're using the idea of Bitcoin and really just simplifying down how these doctors can one take control of their data back to what you mentioned on Nostr, but then more importantly, or just as importantly, take control of their money with Bitcoin.
Yeah, absolutely. You highlighted a big piece of what's broken in the current healthcare system, which is that revenue cycle. And typically, health systems and anyone being paid by a third party is not actually collecting that revenue for 2 to 3 months after they provide that service. And they're only collecting about 9 cents on the dollar for all the debt that they're chasing. And we have significant hundreds of thousands of people going bankrupt every year from medical expenses. So as it really affects the individual, it also really impacts the business and the business model around payments. And today, about 6 to 10% of every healthcare transaction goes to a middleman. So very significant, and even more than the retail credit card fees is baked into those electronic medical record costs, the billing processing, and that creates a major strain on that revenue cycle management for what are typically pretty low margin businesses. Some of the bigger health systems certainly now are sitting on a lot of cash. They have high revenues, but also very significant fixed costs. And I think Bitcoin can plug into any organization in the healthcare space. But where we're seeing more movement and where I've had success introducing Bitcoin is to more independent practitioners that have the autonomy to move quickly and introduce and just offer Bitcoin as a payment option. And one of the best solutions that I love introducing is Zaprite, a local Austin company, and really taking a nice approach, I think, to enabling businesses to have both all point of sale, payment links, and invoices. And so particularly for DPC or concierge medicine, it's a monthly or biannual or annual membership fee, and they're collecting that directly from the patient. And now you actually, as the doctor, have significantly more time to spend with that patient because you're getting paid directly instead of getting scrapes on a fee-for-service model. You're and only being able to spend on average 7 minutes with your patient every year. And maybe having 1,500 to 2,000 patients in your panel, you can afford to run a business with 300, 400, 500 patients or members that you're providing really excellent care to. And Bitcoin aligns perfectly with that value for value exchange, because now you're paying directly, you're lowering that transaction fee from 6 to 10% potentially for the bigger businesses in the healthcare space, all the way towards zero. So that's significant savings on the bottom line to an organization. And you're being transparent on your pricing, and you're not reliant on any third parties. And so all this, as I speak to it, I think echoes Bitcoin's principles, because there's no middleman, there's no bank that you need. It's peer-to-peer cash that you can use, whether it's Bitcoin on the layer one on the main chain for bigger transactions, or Lightning for micropayments, it even opens up a whole host of new use cases in the health space. So just getting set up with the Bitcoin wallet, understanding, hey, how am I going to accept Lightning payments? Is it going to be custodial service like a Strike, or do I need, can I set up my own node via a service like Alby Hub? There's amazing tools that are out there. And so where I feel fortunate too, and just why it's so fun to be building on Bitcoin is because you don't have to build it all yourself. It's an open network, and you need to kind of understand and have a sense of how the technologies work and integrate together, and what are the trade-offs of different solutions. But as we get into this point now, even a few years into me doing this work, the tools just keep getting better. And because it's still a relatively smaller ecosystem, they're very responsive on feedback. So as I've had different needs for my healthcare clients on the functionality or feature set within a payment tool, typically companies are, especially Zaprite, I'll call out, are very responsive in adding that additional functionality, which especially in the legacy healthcare space, you're not going to get, right? Like, good luck going to try and convince Epic, or a United Healthcare, for example, to accept Bitcoin payments. It's not going to happen, right? And even some of the tools that are supporting more independent businesses in healthcare are also still, not interested in Bitcoin. So that's where I've been trying to have some master classes and doing some free education as much as I can to help people understand, particularly health professionals in Bitcoin. And usually it clicks and they see it, but then it's okay, gets into how am I going to do this? How manual is this process versus some of my automated systems? But ultimately, I think it can help them strengthen their practice. So got a couple case studies happy to speak to if you guys are interested to kind of paint a picture a bit further. But that's how I'm seeing really Bitcoin address some of that waste and inefficiency. But ultimately, it's fraud, right? There's a lot of fraud, waste, and abuse in healthcare, particularly when it comes to billing government for your services. So anyone taking care of Medicare over 65 plus or Medicaid, low income, there's just such crazy things going on that hopefully now with the reorganization around HHS and CMS, I think are going to be coming down the pipeline, because having seen it from the inside, it's definitely scary and unfortunate. And so I believe in more free market solutions fixing a lot of this and being able to, and while there's some value in still having a government safety net, it's ballooned to the point that, there shouldn't be, there's 85 million people on Medicaid. I mean, and it's just not sustainable. And from a state perspective, the way it's administered in different states is very challenging. So, and then there's hacks all the time on the data side. You mentioned how there's centralization on that point, whether it's Epic, but ultimately last year, 1 out of every 3 Americans' healthcare data was hacked. And at some point, people might just say, "Oh, I don't care, whatever." People get it, but we should care about our privacy. That data is very intimate; it's important, and that's where I think Nostr can come into.
Yeah, and I mean, even to add on that, in the news recently, there was the 23andMe bankruptcy. So like that actually kind of gave me a little bit of hope, where everybody was like, wait, they're just going to be able to sell this? And people at least asking that question of, I don't know how many millions of Americans' data they have, but that's potentially going to the highest bidder, which it just seems kind of wrong. So if that does happen, then hopefully it'll be a switch where people are like, we need to take that back on and own our data. And if it doesn't happen, then it should establish a little bit more trust in the system of how they actually end up kind of getting rid of that all of that data.
Yeah, and they had sold over 12 million kits, almost 15 million individuals' data now that is available, as you said, to the highest bidder. So that should definitely scare some people, but thankfully I didn't do that service. But
they got
many
me.
have, and yeah, it happens, and it's we'll see what can be used out of that data at some point. But hopefully we're shifting, and where we've hit maybe peak centralization, and now we're moving along into the decentralization framework. Especially if you guys have read The Sovereign Individual, and that was a big piece of my own journey and reading a book that was written in 1997, but telling the story of hundreds of years of centralization and decentralization cycles, and foreseeing a lot of the kind of digital nomad world that we're living in now, but also power that it brings to the individual. But it's going to take some time to unwind a lot of the centralized and kind of convenience and ease that's been created through our current experience online.
Yeah, I'm fascinated with your work that you're doing there with Nostr, and really excited to see what shakes out as you guys build that. That's a really important project that you guys are working on. One question I have for you, John, just zooming out a little bit, it sounds like independent practitioners have kind of really taken to your work, and you touched on, data, revenue cycle. Like, let's say I'm an independent practitioner or just a healthcare practice of some sort. Why is Bitcoin important for me? Like beyond those things, just like more broad level.
Yeah, I think first and foremost, it's creating a redundant payment rail, and having another way
Mm,
to receive payments is super important.
hmm
We saw during COVID for certain ways that providers were practicing. They may have had their bank accounts, many did have their bank accounts canceled. So if you're used to accepting fiat via traditional means, all of a sudden your business comes to a halt. How am I going to keep my business running? So Bitcoin offers that alternative payment rail that's always available for you in this peer-to-peer model. I think that's super important. And another is saving in Bitcoin and having that treasury perspective, Bitcoin from a treasury perspective, continue to grow. So a lot of these independent businesses, of course, it's a pass through personally, but they may have left the bigger system that had a cushier paycheck, and they just kind of had to check the boxes from the doctor's salary perspective. And all of a sudden, the doctor is an entrepreneur. They're running a business. They're having their revenue, but also their costs, and they want to focus on delivering the best care that they can. They don't necessarily want to get too in the weeds on the operations. So that's where I've come in and provided some support to different practices that are out there, and specifically from the Bitcoin adoption perspective, it's sending a signal to your local community and your market. You're probably going to be the first one to really to be doing it, and I think it helps particularly in markets that have higher concentrations of Bitcoiners, such as Texas as one example, right? And in Austin, where I had my first client, and then another in San Antonio with Dr. Roger Mozagemba, who is a really interesting case study because he was the first doctor at Teladoc 20 plus years ago, which started the movement into telemedicine. He now has his own practice and saw the value in Bitcoin and needed some support in just getting stood up, understanding Bitcoin, helping educate some of his team members as well. And so now he's accepting Bitcoin. And while it might take time to continue to build up and see, okay, what percent of people are actually going to pay in Bitcoin, it's going to be pretty low to start out. But I think that number will continue to grow as Bitcoiners in those areas see, oh, here's a practitioner that gets it. He's done the work, proof of work to put in a Bitcoin option. And I feel comfortable in reestablishing that patient physician relationship, because that's something too that's been stripped out of the current system, where a
hmm
doctor used to take care of a whole town and really build those relationships and get to know someone on a deeper level, understand the lifestyle and the health of those people, and versus now where, again, you don't have a lot of time as a doctor to spend with your patient, and it's really you're spending in front of the screen checking all the boxes in Epic, and now you don't really know when something really is off. You don't have someone that you can just call. And so that's where I see Bitcoin really fitting in. Another client of mine, Dr. Victor Levitan, over my hometown in Illinois, he's also adopted Bitcoin now and integrated it. And while most of his patients are Medicare age, they probably won't be paying in Bitcoin. A lot of them are still paying in checks, right? It's old school. Over time, I think as the clientele, grows, he'll be
Did
able to
they,
attract some younger patients as well and say, okay, oh, this doc's accepting Bitcoin.
for those doctors that aren't necessarily accepting a lot of payments, then is the conversation steer a little bit more towards the store of value use case? Are they also saving in Bitcoin?
Yeah, generally they're saving in Bitcoin too. And, I
Yeah,
think once you realize that Bitcoin is the best form of money, the most efficient way to get it is actually accepting it directly for your services, right? Rather
100%.
than having to
Yeah.
use even the 1%. fiat exchange. So some of my clients certainly then, as they're going down their own Bitcoin journey, say take some other personal funds that they have or some of the business funds and just convert it into Bitcoin, establish a treasury is definitely one step. But because the percent of payments in Bitcoin is going to be lower, most of them can afford to just hold that in Bitcoin, right? They're not going to need to liquidate it for any fiat expenses. And I think that's an important consideration for the business too, or even if you do need to convert back into cash, great. You can do that, but even better would be going up the supply chain as well and saying, okay, will this supplier accept Bitcoin? And that will create more circular economies in Bitcoin. But ultimately, I subscribe to Parker Lewis's pay me in Bitcoin theory. And really, it's the merchants that are going to send the signal and say, hey, I want you to pay me in Bitcoin. Here are the reasons why. And then also attaching an incentive to it. So for my clients that I have on the consulting side, I generally have, here's my price, still using dollars as unit of account, but saying here's the price in Bitcoin. And then if you want to pay me in fiat, it's a 10% premium. Whether that's ACH or credit card, which does take account, that 3% fee that I would have been taking a hit as a merchant. And then that's enough of an incentive too to get my clients thinking, okay, I'm going to figure out now, how do I get Bitcoin and how do I pay you in Bitcoin? Because that's the same thing that their customers are going to have to do. And so it puts them in kind of the customer's shoe and says, okay, if what's going to actually move the needle for me to go ahead and get Bitcoin, or even just download Strike and say I can convert my fiat directly at the point of sale into Bitcoin, take advantage of this discount. That's there for the taking. You just have to be a little bit savvy and know the tools. And I'm happy to help them along in that journey. And I think
Do you think
that's where gradually then suddenly we'll get more and more people who are like, okay, maybe I should get some Bitcoin because I can get a discount for this service.
Do you think that needs to be because you're selling kind of a Bitcoin service, Bitcoin themed service, right? So charging a premium to receive the payment in fiat versus offering a discount for like I've seen it both ways. Like let's say you're a dentist. Like are you going to be able to add a 10% fee if they pay in fiat, or would it be really better, you think, in that situation to do a discount if they pay in Bitcoin?
It's a great question, and funny you bring up dentistry because I had this come up specifically with my client, Dr.
Okay. Okay.
Wilson, who's up
Uh-huh.
in Michigan. But actually, there are some regulatory considerations for depending on the service you're providing. So in dental, he actually can't do any discounts. Um, he needs to have it because he's still collecting some insurance payments as well. And then usually these patients will have like an additional amount they owe beyond whatever the insurance is covering. So in the dental use case specifically, you can't really play around with the premiums and discounts, but more so around memberships, things like, again, direct primary care, where it's still health. You're going to get health services, but it's more of this package. I think that's where you can have a lot of flexibility. I know Dr. Roger, I think, did a Bitcoin discount for some of his fees. So I think I see the framing, going both ways, but I think more so than, oh, it's a favor for you to pay me in Bitcoin. It's kind of like the other way where, you should have to pay more to pay me in fiat. Like I want you, this is why I want you to pay me in Bitcoin, and saying this is my fair price. Like this is the price, value for the services I'm going to be providing. And then if you don't want to pay my preferred way, then here are some other options, because I think in this transition period, it's of course realistic to still expect people to pay in dollars, but it's great to see it kind of matched up side by side, and it's always fun to have events where you can do this in real time and learn. And we had this last year at our Bitcoin halving party in Austin, where about half the tickets and in-person payments were made using Bitcoin. And then we'll see what happens in a few weeks here with our Spring into Bitcoin up in Hutto at Hippo Social Club. We'll be doing ALS, fundraising for ALS, the Health Research Fund, and we'll have some merchants there as well. We're accepting Bitcoin. We're accepting Bitcoin for tickets with a discount as well. So it just shows, who every individual gets to make that choice. And I think we still are going to see Gresham's law, and kind of people are going to hoard their good money and
Yeah.
spend the bad money first. But eventually we're going to see more facilitation of payments in Bitcoin just because it's easier and more convenient. And you see this specifically in places outside the US. I mean, I was just in Costa Rica for the last 3 months and got a local vendor, coffee shop, brewery, El Jardín, up and running, accepting Bitcoin. And they have amazing infrastructure there with the Bitcoin Jungle app. It's all open source. It's really easy to download. You see a map of other merchants who are accepting Bitcoin. In the town where I was, Nosara particularly, didn't have a lot of Bitcoin activity, especially relative to Uvita and Santa Teresa, other places in the country. So they can get, I think, a big uptick for Bitcoiners that come through and say, oh, where can I spend some Bitcoin, for kind of still like the novel component of it. But it's really easy to get up and running, set up a point of sale, and it's custodial to start. But usually after the business owners earn a couple million sats, Bitcoin Jungle will help get them set up with a hardware wallet and being able to hold their own keys. Because you can be a little more flexible there with Galoy on the back end and having custodial services, where in the US, obviously that's been pushed out. You can't really do that. So I think we're going to see more and more adoption. It's way easier. And the dollar is already in this, along the lines, maybe we can have a discussion here too, as the Medium Exchange podcast and what's being used. But it's just so interesting to see, the dollar is essentially just on par in terms of acceptance, even down to the $1 bill in a place like Costa Rica alongside their colones. And the exchange rate is just kind of silly. Like you have the biggest bill there is a 20,000 colones paper, and that's worth about $40. And then the 10,000, which is worth about $20, and then the 5,000, which is worth 10. So it's like, I think they kind of probably play around with it so that stays the exchange rate now, because anything different, the mental math just gets ridiculous. So people can kind of do the math pretty easily. But that's where I think as Bitcoin continues to appreciate, and you have, right now we're around 1,000 sats per dollar, it just gets a lot easier to start transacting Bitcoin and even eventually using Bitcoin more as the unit of account and how you're pricing things.
Medium of Exchange is sponsored by the Bitcoin Payments Advisor. If you own or run a business and you'd like to accept Bitcoin but don't know how, the Bitcoin Payments Advisor can help. From specific software recommendations and accounting implications to training employees and marketing so your customers know you accept this new form of payment, the Bitcoin Payments Advisor can help simplify your journey in accepting Bitcoin for your business. Check out bitcoinpaymentsadvisor.com and get 10% off if you pay in Bitcoin. Again, that's bitcoinpaymentsadvisor.com. Now let's get back to the show. It's so fun to hear all the work that you're doing, Jon, because as someone who's been in credit card processing the last 15 years, one of the huge trends that we've seen is merchants beginning to add on fees if you pay by credit card, because merchants are just getting squeezed, right? And so there is this trend, this huge trend of merchants awakening to the fact that, costs are rising, the cost of accepting money is rising because the credit card companies have a monopoly on the ability to accept money. And so it's called typically either surcharge or cash discount, but it's the gas station where they charge a fee or there's a minimum, but that we're seeing that across all kinds of industries now, whether it be like restaurant, hospitality, or in the medical world, like with dental, a lot of times they'll start adding on an additional fee if you're paying in credit card. And so it's really interesting to just kind of see that taken one step further with Bitcoin, where you can accept an even better form of money and reduce the fees in the process. You're kind of killing two birds with one stone there. So that's exciting to hear all the work that you're doing there.
Thanks, I appreciate that.
And to build off that too, one of the things that I've been kind of playing around with the idea of, in terms of every cycle has a theme or a kind of narrative around it, is I see this cycle of Bitcoin as really that bridge cycle where we are bringing these solutions to these providers. So for example, Jon, you were saying it's relatively easy to get set up with a Strike account or to get set up with a River account or a Zaprite account and start taking and accepting payments. It's just that because the ecosystem is so small and it may not seem small to us because we're so deep in it, but the doctor who's attending to patients or the chiropractor or the dentist, they don't know that these services exist, and they don't know that these services feel and look just like any other traditional finance tool that they've been using, right? So I just want to like get your thoughts on that idea of the bridge cycle, because then to what you were saying is that merchant might work their way up the supply chain and say, hey, I'd rather pay you in Bitcoin because it's cheaper, better, faster, and I I want to also bring you along for this ride. So I guess the question really is just, can you talk about some of the progression in that that you've seen in the last few years with Satoshi Health, and really just the continued and compounding adoption that is coming along in the space, both in the healthcare industry, but also just broadly.
Yeah, absolutely. And you highlight a great point there, and it's that the business owner is busy delivering their own service and running their business. And so once you start to introduce anything else new, it becomes, a change management kind of process, and who's involved in on the admin side, on bookkeeping, on financials, on taxes. You may or may not have someone that can kind of put their hand up and say, no, we're not doing this. It's not worth it. And that certainly happens as you get into bigger and more bureaucratic organizations. And that's where I found success going to smaller business owners, who are still who are open to this and maybe aligned on a value side and just need a few hours, over the course of a month or a couple months, just to really understand it and get it set up and set aside an hour a week to work with me. And so I think that piece of it is really important. So being mindful of, how busy that owner is and what they're focused on, but how does Bitcoin integrate into the tools they're already using? And give one story there. And you mentioned chiropractor. I did work with a chiropractor, Dr. Pop, who's out in Wyoming. And he and most other chiropractors are using this software called Jane. And it's just their kind of practice management and also has billing in it. And as we've seen a lot of these SaaS solutions pop up over the last few years, generally they want to get into billing, right? Because they can get a scrape on all the transactions. And that's where you have a lot of middlemen in these transactions, and Bitcoin eliminates that. So those types of platforms are not going to be quick to integrate Bitcoin, because it's taking away some of their revenue source. So where we need to be a little creative is saying, okay, how is this going to play into your process? Are you just going to have an alternative Bitcoin pay now button, and this is the steps that your Bitcoin patients or customers go through that's separate from the other? Or can you replace your fiat rail and use something like Zaprite, where there's also the credit card option within the checkout experience, and you have fiat and Bitcoin options? That's been successful too. But where I think we're really going to be heading with this, and ultimately you can have some custom API connections and builds as well in those processes. And actually Task Trails has a really great integration they built for our Run for Hal in Austin, where through how they normally do the checkout with runs, they were able to embed that Zaprite payment link. It does involve a bit more work, and you need to have kind of the interest and technical ability to do it. But that's possible across a lot of these other domains and fields. So that's where I've been, it's been fun for me to also learn about different industries such as architecture, with my client Brian Jones, and also even on the e-bike side and liquid vitamins with John Ramsey and Tropical Oasis, because they're facing different challenges. Whether you're a manufacturing business or you have e-commerce brand, you want to just plug into your Shopify store. Great, use your Strike API. And so it's like all these tools are there, and it's just kind of presenting in a way, figuring out, okay, how can I make this as easy as possible for the business owner, where they see the value in spending some time and money right now to get up to speed and do it. And I think it is like, if you build it, they will come. And it's kind of this transition period now where you just need to get set up with Bitcoin kind of once. But a lot of the previous friction points where you might have, oh, send me your Bitcoin address. Oh, if I mess up the copy paste. There's gonna be one, I'm not losing my Bitcoin. I don't want to do that. So once you get over the hurdle of just spending Bitcoin, also of course playing around with the Lightning Network as it continues to grow, and you can have bigger and bigger payments, well over thousands of dollars clearing in a second. Like it's amazing what's possible. And so I think it's just an openness ultimately, and a willingness to change and adopt new technology. So just as we were maybe too young for it, but the whole transition to the internet and you're gonna become an internet business, or you're gonna have a website, and that was just now it's obviously table stakes. You got to have a website. If you're not gonna have a website, you don't exist. I think that'll be the same way with Bitcoin eventually, where you're gonna have to accept Bitcoin because there's just that many consumers that want to pay in it, because that's how they've been storing value, and then that's how they've eventually going to want to spend that value on things that they need. That's where I think I differ, and then many of us in Bitcoin differ, even maybe from Michael Saylor, or saying, okay, never sell your Bitcoin. I think there is a price that everybody's going to have on selling their Bitcoin. People that bought 10, 15 years ago have had a price, and they might be selling now around 100K. And then other people buying in this decade are going to have a different price. And as Bitcoin's natural volatility in dollar terms smooths out as it continues to appreciate, you're naturally it's gonna be a lot easier to using it in commerce day to day.
Yeah, I mean, in change management, there's a term that people love to throw around like dual paths or coexistence, and that's where we're at with especially Zaprite. And I think Zaprite's doing the best out of any kind of merchant adoption tool, because you see it right in front of yourself when you're forced to pay. You see that there's the premium for fiat, and then you see the fair market value that you could pay in Bitcoin. And right now, because we're so early, it takes people who have taken the time for the education and the understanding of what you just referenced to be willing to share that or spend their Bitcoin. However, over time, it will just naturally phase itself out to where the US dollar, maybe it's still kind of a unit of account in terms of how we're pricing things mentally, but transactions are going to be settled and finalized with Bitcoin, because it just makes too much sense for all parties involved. And I think that is really the phase that we're moving towards. And there will be more instances of like, do I want to pay this extra 4, 10, whatever percent, or do I just want to spot buy Bitcoin and send it that way to save my time and energy?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're in that transition period now, but also there's going to be a big push still to, as much as the US now super bullish and getting strategic Bitcoin reserve and buying Bitcoin and holding it, they're going to want to continue to use the dollar, whether in different digital means, right? And stable coins being the one that maybe in the US, it won't take the form of a CBDC, but still you're going to have private stable coins that you don't have a lot of privacy, and that can be frozen very easily and quickly from any centralized authority. Meanwhile, in Europe, CBDC is being pushed pretty hard. Looks like it's going to get launched around October, maybe later this year. We'll see what the response is. If it's anything like Nigeria, you're gonna have a lot of pushback and people that don't want to use this thing. But at the same time, unfortunately, people often in other countries don't have that choice. So I'm hopeful that in the US, we'll still have that choice. We'll have the freedom to transact the way that we want, even if the dollar's still, legal tender. You don't need to make Bitcoin legal tender, but let businesses and individuals make the decision in how they want to transact. And if you want the convenience and still using stable dollars, go for it. Because they're going to have to print more of them in whatever way, shape, or form to address this $36 trillion debt issue. Did just finish reading The Big Print, Larry Lepard. It's a great book. Something you can hand off also to any of the other boomer relatives to relate to just to the age and what they've experienced. But I think, the system's worked one way for 40, 50 years, and we're seeing it coming to the point where it's just not working anymore. Especially for young people who want to save and who are working hard, and they're still having a difficulty in doing the things they want to do because they're feeling stuck, or they just can't afford the home, because the home is now 5 to 7 times your average annual income instead of it being 2 times, which what it was a few decades ago. Or in Canada, it's even worse, right? It's like 10 times average income. So it's really I think, a choice that individuals then will have to make and say, okay, if I choose to store my value of the work I'm doing in Bitcoin, and I choose to spend and support businesses who are also in this network, we're naturally going to strengthen over time versus having to store your value in a currency that's devaluing, which is what purposefully, which is what inflation, the stated rate's 2%, but now they're saying, oh, maybe we need to just pick 3% because we can't get down to 2%. So now 3% of your wealth is going to be stolen every year instead of 2%. And so, I think as you get orange pilled, you realize it's just become so obvious that, you should be saving as much as you can in Bitcoin. Yes, there will be some changes in the short term, in terms of the US dollar price, because there's going to be more dollars printed. But ultimately, there will only ever be 21 million Bitcoin, and you can get your piece of that and hold it in 12 words in your head, go wherever in the world. And as more merchants there, you can go and buy your coconuts or buy your coffee with Bitcoin very easily and in an interoperable way. So I'm hopeful that, more people will make that decision, that they want to have a sense of ownership and privacy over their money, and they choose to use that one. But there will, of course, be places that get forced into devaluations, such as we saw in Bolivia last week or 2 weeks ago, where they're having anyone storing dollars is being forced to convert that into the Bolivian currency and getting devalued by 50% immediately. So, you think you're storing your value in something a bit more stable like the dollar, but even still, if it's held in a bank, it's permissioned, someone else is really controlling it. It's an IOU. And so if we start taking advantage of what Bitcoin offers, it's really a blessing. And I'm hopeful in trying to, as I'm on the Bitcoin marketing team, as a lot of us are, there's no CEO to report to, so you can be creative, you can have fun with it. And that's why I've loved, doing what I'm doing over the last few years and, getting out of kind of the fiat healthcare system. And as more and more roles and jobs get squeezed, as you mentioned, Jason, on the fiat processing side, certainly is a big one. But even business models in other aspects of the industry that I've seen, such as the supply chain or medical products and supplies, where it's just more and more difficult to deliver value. And as you're seeing more manufacturing and whatnot go overseas, it's just, I even saw that from an exchange risk perspective. We were buying all of our products from China. Okay, the dollar devalues against the yuan. All of a sudden, your products are a lot more expensive. And so even those types of interactions where they were just accepting Bitcoin at some of the Chinese manufacturers we were working with actually would have smoothed out a lot of the business volatility that we saw just from exchange rate change volatility. I don't know if you've seen that, Jason, too, in some of your fiat payment works as it relates to international payments.
Yeah, most of my clients, some of them accept international payments, but typically they are pretty focused on domestic. And then the way the Visa and MasterCard rails work are, you know, whatever dollar amount that you're charging, it just auto converts in the background for the merchant so that they don't have to, handle that. I have one other question for you, John. So one of the things that you mentioned is that it's so obvious that it's a blessing. Jack, you mentioned it just will get to the point where it makes too much sense for all parties involved. But for today, John, you're dealing with doctors, dentists, chiropractors. There's got to be some pushback today, right? What are the biggest misconceptions that businesses have about Bitcoin that you're seeing in the market today?
Yeah, I think the biggest pushback would probably be kind of the phrase, the juice isn't worth the squeeze. And, it's just, okay, I can go and set up Bitcoin, but is anyone actually going to pay me in Bitcoin?
Hmm.
And, thinking, okay, I'm going to be spending some time and money here just getting the system set up and maybe other employees getting them on board. There's some kind of political capital they need to spend to say, okay, here's another process or step that we're going to introduce. So the ROI, I think, just really needs to be there. And I think that's fair, totally, from the business owner perspective to challenge and push back on that. But I think, the way I like to address that in a couple ways is, again, anyone paying in Bitcoin, you're going to lower your transaction fees compared to what you're getting taken from now particularly around the credit card side. And as we mentioned, even higher fees on the electronic medical record and billing side of things. And then it's putting yourself out there from a marketing perspective and saying, can I grow my business and attract more customers I wouldn't have gotten unless I was accepting Bitcoin? And another way to do that is through Bitcoin rewards, platform like Oshi, for example, that makes it pretty easy to tack on rewards and loyalty and increase your average order value, increase your customer lifetime value. Some of the traditional metrics businesses are looking at to grow their business. I think all that can happen with Bitcoin. So that's definitely a big hang up. I think another, is just still a lot of the FUD that's out there around Bitcoin that's lingering around a lot of the mainstream media takes, whether it uses a lot of energy, and someone who considers themselves green think they don't want to use Bitcoin without realizing that in order to be profitable mining Bitcoin, you actually have to have the lowest cost energy, which incentivizes stranded or cheaper or wasted energy, which ultimately is better for the environment. You need to kind of explain some of these things, or you think, okay, well, maybe the government's going to ban it. And now at this point in 2025, whereas my work I was doing a couple of years ago, the story might have been different. Now at this point, I think at least in the US, pretty safe to say, Bitcoin's not going to get banned at that level, let alone can be stopped. So I think some of the FUD naturally dissipates over time, but certainly there are challenges or questions that come up where, depending on the age of the business owner, but that's where I think the younger business owners are, maybe they're savvy enough, they know it, they can get it set up by themselves. But where I've been able to support other business owners too can be like, maybe one business owner is personally very, very orange pilled. They're already saving Bitcoin. They're like fully on board, but their partner is not. And so it can be helpful to have like somewhat of have an objective voice, have someone come in, explain Bitcoin and how it works, and present the options to that other partner where they can say yes or no. But eventually they kind of see, okay, it's not just coming from my crazy business partner over here, but there's, more, there's a lot deeper levels to it. So that's where I think the consulting side of things is fun, and kind of telling that story.
Medium of Exchange is sponsored by Polaris Payments. Let's face it, for now, businesses still need to accept fiat and credit cards. Polaris Payments helps with all your credit card processing needs using a consultative approach. Think of Polaris like a performance coach, helping take your business to the next level when it comes to accepting all forms of money. And the best part, it's run by a Bitcoiner. For more information about Polaris Payments, visit polarispayments.com. That's POLARISPAYMENTS.com. Now, let's get back to the show. Yeah, so basically having a third party like yourself come in who can have kind of an objective view and be able to explain the pros and cons from a broader perspective rather than just from that one, owner, founder, manager, etc.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think as bigger businesses start to adopt a Bitcoin strategy, and we're seeing that now in GameStop, yesterday, and you have leaders in the healthcare space, the medical side, like Semler Scientific, it's often needed. You need to have charismatic or owner that has a lot of, especially in the public company side, the ability to actually make it happen. But even in private organizations that have a lot of layers to them, it's potentially getting many different parties on board with a certain strategic decision to integrate a Bitcoin strategy. But it can take, again, many shapes and forms, where the simplest can just be, okay, we'll put 1% or 5% of our treasury in Bitcoin. Eventually it can be more customer interactions as it comes to accepting payments and rewards. But ultimately, you don't need to do all of them at once. So it can be a journey. You can, pick and choose which you think will kind of resonate or move the needle for you first, and then come back to the other aspects. But generally, no matter what industry you're in or type of business you are now, even specifically in healthcare, and I'm a yogi, a yoga teacher. So I've also done a lot of writing on the integration of Bitcoin and yoga, and I've helped some yogis over time accept Bitcoin payments. You're probably going to be a first mover in whatever field you're in, and whether you're posting on Instagram or X, or you're already posting on Nostr, you can make a splash and kind of set yourself apart from your competitors just from the fact that you're integrating Bitcoin to some extent. And eventually that won't be the case. Obviously, you won't be not everybody's going to be a first mover as everyone accepts Bitcoin. But I think here, still in early 2025, that is still the case. But I bet by the end of the decade, that won't be the case. And it'll be, in order to stay in business, you have to accept Bitcoin, and you have to save in Bitcoin, because otherwise there's just going to be too much volatility, and it's going to be too difficult for you to run a business on a money that's hyperinflating. Whether at first it's the other 159 currencies before the dollar, and we have that play out, or it's eventually the dollar. The history of fiat currencies is that every single one that is not backed by sound money goes to zero. So I'm not hoping that happens tomorrow, and hopefully there can be this dual existence for a while, and we figure out a way to make that work. But I think either way, Bitcoin will have to be the neutral reserve currency for that type of system to even operate, which means might make sense to get some in case it catches on.
Couldn't agree more. It's funny. I was talking to a friend yesterday, and I was sending him some LinkedIn internship opportunities that bigger Bitcoin businesses in the space were sharing, and I was just basically like, I would have loved to have this opportunity when I was in college. It does show the growth of the industry, where there is there are careers and opportunities that you can take on, but we are still so early, to your point, where if you're in more of a niche industry, you're probably going to be that first mover, and that takes more risk, but that also provides more asymmetric upside. So we'll continue to see that, and as the purchasing power and the price continues to appreciate, I think you hit it spot on. You might as well catch some in case it catches on.
Awesome, totally agree.
Jon, thank you so much for coming on. This was great. Really excited to see everything you continue pushing forward in the space. Super excited for the Austin Bitcoin Club event coming up in a few weeks to raise money for ALS. So I'm sure we'll talk a lot. We'll talk a lot over the next few weeks with ticket sales and fundraising. But really appreciate you taking the time today.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks so much, guys, for having me on. This was fun, and good luck in getting your podcast up and running, and as you continue to bring on more guests and tell these stories as a medium of exchange. I think that's awesome. So keep me posted and how else I can support your guys' efforts.
Awesome. Yeah, same here. Vice versa, man. Excited for what you're doing.
Thank you.